Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Sometimes in life you come across something where you just can't help but stand up and offer a slow clap of congratulations. For me, this happened in preparing for this podcast. In talking with our guest, it was shared with me that something was pure gold. And that was KFC's X account, or Twitter account, formerly known as, and the number of its followers. Can you have any guesses as to how many they have? 11, all 5 Spice Girls, and 6 people called Herb. I guess the secret is out of the bag now. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the head of marketing at Infotools. Today, I'm joined by Bryan Smith, product evangelist and implementation specialist at Ipsos. Thanks for joining us on the show again, Bryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Happy to be here.
Welcome. So Bryan is a self-professed data nerd and efficiency advocate. In his tenure in the insights industry, he's worked on a variety of projects in varying roles, with a common thread being, how can this be done more efficiently? Bryan has automated tedious tasks like tracking survey fieldwork progress and populating PowerPoint decks, designed client-facing data portals, and built processes that have reduced time researchers spend on projects. Bryan is always curious and enjoys finding novel solutions to the challenges that exist in market research. So Bryan, with that all said, what is the most significant thing you wanted to share with us today?
Yeah, so what I wanted to share with you all today was really how we get to that kind of sweet spot of technology adoption. There's a lot of core fundamentals that we often forget about, but a lot of them kind of ring true. So I want to talk about my experience kind of doing that within my role at Ipsos, and maybe you'll take some things from this that you can apply in your own careers and journeys.
Cool, and it may have something to do with those secret spices that we that we talked about as well.
Exactly.
So let's start off with secret number 1, and we'll see how many we can get through. What are the fundamentals that people should hold on to when assessing new technology?
Yeah, so there's a lot, and they're going to sound very cliche, but really the one that I think of as most important that really feeds into a lot of others is really thinking about what the end user is trying to do and what they're going to get as a benefit from the technology that is being used, whether that's something that's new and emerging like generative AI, or something that's kind of solving a very specific problem or giving you more access to investigate data in a variety of different ways. The key piece is really to focus on who is using it and what benefit they're going to get from it. Because in order for somebody to make a change in the way that they do things, there's going to need to be not only something that they'll benefit from, but something that's going to go beyond that, that's going to push them out of their comfort zone in the first place. And then the kind of second piece that kind of carries from that is that velocity or momentum. That the most important thing after you know why and kind of what's going to drive that change is to just start and just keep it going. And those things kind of trickle through in a variety of different ways, and we'll touch on them a few different ways today as well.
Absolutely. So you mentioned cliches, and I guess with fundamentals, like we should never tire of saying the right things, because if they're fundamental, they're always going to remain true. We often drum on about X, Y, Z, but it's only once we get sick of repeating certain messages that they actually start getting through to people and getting fed back to us. So that was true 20 years ago, and it's probably true now more than ever as well, especially when you think about the bombardment of messages that we're all receiving every minute of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So carrying on with one of those is kind of don't boil the ocean. I'm sure you've heard that one before, right? And if you haven't, well, welcome. You're going to hear it a lot more now, right? But there's a real kernel of truth at the kind of center of that, and it's really about starting small. So, I mean, naturally, when we look at these types of kind of changes that we're trying to make within our organizations, we do need to boil the ocean, right? We need to get hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people to change the way that they do things. That seems like an insurmountable task. It really is, right? You can't do that in a year. You have to really think about small little pieces of like change that you can implement and focus on like getting maybe 2 or 3 people started. And if those 2 or 3 people get started as well, that or get 2 or 3 other people started, then all of a sudden you've got maybe 10 or 12 people that are starting, right? And building that momentum, as I just mentioned, right? And keeping that momentum is really key. But starting small helps it seem more tangible. And especially when you're doing really big things. If you can break it down into smaller bits of work, you actually can make progress on it versus trying to do it all at once and you just kind of get stuck. Another one you may have heard of is analysis paralysis, right? If you have too many options, right, the same kind of deal, right? So keeping it small helps prevent that. You say, okay, we're going to focus on this one team and have them use it, and then we'll focus on another team, or maybe focus on a certain business line that exists within your organization or a specific need case, right? Maybe there's a platform or tool that can solve multiple things, but starting with one aspect, driving that message home, really focusing on why it's important, how it will impact people, then gets with people to, okay, let's say, yeah, I will try that, right? And so kind of putting all of these pieces together really kind of makes it work.
It's that idea of 6 degrees of separation, isn't it? That if one
Mhm.
person knows, 2 people, so on, and
Exactly.
it's exponential in its uptake, and it may be frustrating at times as well when it's not going as fast as you think it is.
Mhm.
But when you step back, you can actually see it's probably about to ramp up a lot faster than you had thought of at that time, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So go ahead.
Yes. So, what are some of the different kind of ways that market researchers use technology in their daily lives?
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, you can think about it the very kind of simplest fashion, and the majority of the communication that we do is now via email or Teams or Zoom, right? So that's a technology piece that's factoring into that, right? How we're able to do this podcast now, right? That's not really that exciting as kind of commonplace, right? So thinking more about how people use technology that they typically wouldn't, right, within the market research realm, that may be kind of how they're managing their task list. I mean, classic is the pen and paper to-do list, break things off, but there's a bunch of different project management platforms and things like that that can be used to varying degrees with differing needs. We also have, of course, the new emerging technology of generative AI, and how that is going to impact us. We're still kind of learning, but there's a lot of really kind of immediate benefits for folks in knowledge work, right? Summarizing meeting minutes, like meeting notes, or drafting up emails or drafting content for communication internally, is also kind of a really strong suit. But as with kind of these emerging technologies, you always have to take it with a grain of salt and kind of be cautious, right? So always review and things like that. But there are many other ways that it can impact us, whether it's changing a specific process that we have, maybe it's related to our reporting or the way that we investigate data. And there's a lot of really solid benefits because as we use technology more and more in the kind of matter of course for our day-to-day work, it removes the manual effort that we need to put into it. And that's where a lot of errors and quality control points come into play and those types of things. And we also then can use our brains to do more interesting and engaging work, right? We're automating a lot of the processes, and the majority of our work is interrogating or investigating data. Then that's a lot more fun than sending out a bunch of emails, right? Or chasing someone for to pursue that one thing that you need them to do. So there are a multitude of facets, and that keeps me really happy because there's a lot of ways that we can make people's lives better with technology in market research and other realms as well.
Absolutely, and that's across both agency world and corporate side as
Mhm.
well, isn't there? So both sides of it have got the benefits, but also, I guess, as well, have the challenges to overcome
Mhm.
those uses as well.
Mhm. Absolutely.
So thinking of some of the points that you've just outlined, are there any that surprised you about how much are used, or on the flip side, how much they're underutilized?
So I wouldn't really say surprised, but it's really kind of more so inspired is one way to put it, right? So again, a lot of the process that we do, at least within the supplier side, is really driven by those communication channels, right? And there's almost an over reliance on email in some scenarios, and over reliance on just talking to the person to get it done. That's really great for getting that thing done, but really bad for long-term health of projects, and it leads to kind of band-aid solutions, and we want to avoid that. But it also shows this really great opportunity for how those things can be removed, and that we can get people out of those situations, right? So they're not spending that time talking to that person to clarify something that they sent if there's an automated system that captures that information and shares it internally. And it really, it's just about kind of that empowerment that you get from technology, especially within the market research world, because really at the heart of it, most of us are researchers, and we got into this because we like data, we like understanding how the world works, and we want to do that, right? But often there's all this other stuff that we have to do first before we get to that, right? And if we get to a spot where everyone's spending their time doing things they're passionate about, then work doesn't feel like work, and it feels fun. And then that means that we also have more time to use that outside of work as well, for those things that excite us and keep us happy.
Yeah, that's one thing I always like thinking about with technology is that it should almost disappear in your use of it. So you shouldn't feel like you're
Mhm.
using technology, but rather it's just kind of a natural progression of what you're doing, and therefore you can
Mhm.
focus on the important stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
So, are there any common obstacles that you can think of that may have caused the underutilization from what you've just mentioned, or for any other reason for that fact?
Yeah. So the most common one is kind of resistance to change, right? It's very easy to do the same thing or to stay in your comfort zone. And it's very hard to move out of your comfort zone for whatever it is, whether it's using new technology, learning new skills, chasing after that thing that you really want to do, or trying to go and meet new people. All of these different things often involve a little bit of internal friction, that we don't feel quite comfortable with it. We're not sure if it's going to go really well. So that piece is always kind of the biggest thing. And what I've seen really in particular within kind of the world of market research, is that there's almost a hypersensitivity to things being wrong or things changing, right? So there has to be a very high level of confidence before someone will make a change. And so this is where I'll bring in another one of those kind of fundamental pieces, is the technology adoption curve. So those that are familiar, awesome. Those that aren't, I'll give you a very like 10-second summary. So you have people that are early adopters, it's a very small percentage of the population, and you have a gap, some people that adopt technology at a slower rate, and then the laggards, who are the ones who are slower to adopt and want to make sure that it's proven. And the market research industry, for the most part, is more kind of skewed towards the slow to adopt type of piece. And the hardest part about that technology adoption curve is making the jump from the early adopters to the general populace, and then the rest of the folks that are resistant to change. And it feels like in market research, that gap is way wider than it is with other technology kind of opportunities, we'll say. Right. So that's kind of the biggest hurdle that I've seen, is getting people to be comfortable with it being not 100%, right? To be okay for it to be have a bit of friction, for it to be all right, for it to be wrong, right? There's so much focus on everything being right and being delivered that we can't deliver something wrong, right? Well, we are doing things with humans involved, right? And we are also doing things that are to inform, not to save lives and things like that. In some cases, that does have that application, but it's not like we're on a surgery table where making a wrong decision is going to have catastrophic consequences, right? Sometimes it may feel like that, but it's really about how do we kind of shift that comfort level with kind of risk and things not being 100%. And kind of taking a step back, if we look at that kind of emerging technology of generative AI again, it's a really great time to get involved in it, no matter how comfortable you are with it. Because right now it's still very new. We don't quite know. And a lot of it is going to be wrong, right? Like we know about hallucinations with different chat GPT models and things like that, right? that's kind of commonplace now to know that, right? But the reason that's commonplace, the reason that people are comfortable with it is because we all experienced it. We all got used to it, right? And it's okay for things to not be 100%. And we'll see that more and more and more and more. So doing like things that are outside of your comfort zone, even if they're not related to work, can still help you be a little bit more comfortable with making those types of changes. So that's the thing that I see as kind of the largest barrier that's common.
Mm. And obviously starting small is once again one of those other
It
little
all comes
nuggets.
together. Yep.
I mean, the other thing to this point, a lot of people have possibly an overconfidence in the traditional ways of working at times as well. And we may feel that we do things right 100% of the time historically, but that's not always true. So there's, I can think of an example where presented some numbers once and using a new technology way of working, and that was compared to the old way of working, and there was a delta between them, and they're like, "Oh, your new way of working is wrong," and poured over it and actually had a look. Well, no, this is right, and the way that you were working wasn't. So it can happen both ways, and having an open mind is important.
Absolutely. Especially if you're looking at like technology piece processes instead of manual processes, right? Very often that's the case, right? Where it's like this number is different, but it's actually right in the new process because it's automated and it's not somebody that typed a number into a PowerPoint deck or some. I'm not sure what the specific example you have was, but I can recall a few that fell into that category as well.
Yeah.
So
So what can research teams do to set themselves up for success when it comes to market research technology?
yeah. So the kind of, I mean, a lot of the things really kind of like compact on what we've talked about, right? Starting really small, really understanding the benefit and the why. And the other key piece is communicating that kind of benefit or that why, right? If you look at like some kind of classic like change management literature, it'll say like you have to have a very strong vision about what the change is going to bring people and things like that. And maybe it doesn't need to be a vision, but it needs to be something that's grounded that everyone is going to understand and think, yes, that's something that I'll benefit from. So really thinking about who it is that you're trying to help make the change, why they would make the change, why they may not want to make the change, how you can help them make that change, right? And anything that you can do to do that from multiple different angles as well, right? Having the kind of top-down leadership approach is really important and inspiring for broad reach, but really having communities that are kind of working with people in the day-to-day. So when somebody goes to the water cooler and they say, "Oh, hey, like I was doing this thing on our new technology platform, like have you tried it yet?" "Oh no, like I haven't, like I should because I'm here at the water cooler talking to my friend who I trust," right? And so you really have to have like as many different multiple touch points through all the layers of the organization, driving at that same kind of thing, right? This is going to benefit you. This is the type of thing that makes it worth it for you to take the risk. And then to help people go through that and to take the risk and for there to be a way for them to do that safely, right? Because if you can mitigate some of that where they feel more comfortable stepping out of their comfort zone, maybe with parallels or pilots, that can also really help too, right? Because then they can build that confidence through a kind of validated case study and say, okay, we did this the exact same way on both of the different approaches. This way was a little bit faster and it was a little bit easier, but it was new and different. So, maybe that's enough of a reason for me to give it another shot. And really kind of thinking about that end user and kind of what that benefit that they'll get from it is kind of key.
That's good words. Thinking about your experience working with brands, I guess, and even within Ipsos, what are some of the benefits of using research technology? And can you think of any that may have been unintentional?
Yeah. So, I mean, so some of the benefits are kind of getting to that kind of broad, like that broad reach, right? If you're using market research technology to implement a way of delivering results, as an example, that can be a lot easier than getting PowerPoints out. especially if you've got a touch point like a dashboard or something like that, where an end user can go and can query that data, or can even maybe go into an analysis type of interrogation tool and dig into that data deeper, right? So it really can empower not only my internal colleagues, but also our clients as well, right? So thinking of it kind of broadly, that market research technology really helps kind of, again, taking it back to the simple part, removing those manual processes, which reduces the chance of errors and ultimately gives people more time back, which is really great for work life, but also non-work life, right? If we're not working weekends and things like that, there's more time to spend with our families or to do the things that we enjoy and love. And then in terms of like a kind of unsuspected benefit or surprising one, it's really about once you start getting into these discussions about market research technology and what it should do for you or your organization, it can be really enlightening to understand that there are a lot of different stakeholders within your organization that you don't understand their perspective or don't know what their real benefit is or what they're really looking for. And there's been several scenarios I can think of in the last few years where we've been talking either internally with colleagues or even with clients where we've gone and we've talked about some market research technology and they've had a thought about what it should be. But after like probing and providing some kind of examples and talking through it, you find that like you think you're going this way towards the technology. And then as you start to kind of peel the layers of the onion back and understand what people are really looking for and really needing, that you actually need to go like this way, right? And so that can be a really key piece because those conversations don't happen unless you have something to dig into, right? If you're just delivering data the same way you always have, because that's what it says in the statement of work, then you're not going to understand that the client is actually doing a lot of work with what they receive to then mobilize it internally for all of their stakeholders. When really what they need isn't this kind of polished PowerPoint per se, but they need a way to interrogate the data so they can build their custom reports that deep dive on topics that their colleague has asked them about on a Friday afternoon, right? So you really get to the core need of what people kind of are looking for when you have market research technology involved, because you have to be able to meet that need. And to meet that need, you need to understand that need. So you need to ask about it, right? So that's kind of one of those really kind of unsuspecting benefits is you start to get a little bit more understanding than you would normally.
That's true. And that obviously requires you to take a very, very much I guess, a user-centric approach, understanding what the actual they're trying to achieve, the job to be done is, rather than just to recreate what has been done in the past.
Yeah. And that's an uncomfortable spot to be in too, right?
Indeed.
So
So people would probably expect me to ask this next question in the affirmative, but I'm going to flip it around. Are there any reasons why you'd advocate for a brand to not use market research technology?
yeah, so it's a tough one for sure. Um, there there are certain cases where you wouldn't want to use a market research technology, and that's really in the case where you've got something that meets the need, or if you're like stretching too much. So what I mean by that is it's very possible to think that you may need or your organization may need something to meet an end need. But if meeting that end need can be done in a different way or with something easier or simpler, then that may be the better approach, right? If the like maybe we take like a delivery option. That's where a lot of my work is in the realm of deliveries. That's where I naturally gravitate to. But maybe there is a like single Excel scorecard that's delivered monthly, and there's like 700 users at a kind of a client, and those 700 users consume it. They're used to it, right? It may make sense to move that online, but there could be things like internet accessibility or kind of platform availability and things like that that could actually make that preventative. And it could be that you go down a path where you implement a technology to solve that issue that then creates new challenges because some of the needs were being met really, really well by that specific pathway. And so again, it boils down to like really getting to that real core piece of like, what is it that you're trying to solve? And then if that is indeed something that can be solved with technology, to just take those steps to make those changes, but to be really mindful that it is possible to kind of overshoot. And so the more you can do to find out answers to questions or learn and understand the what it is that you need to do, you can kind of avoid that risk. So understanding who's using, why they're using, and what the ultimate need is can be really key to avoid some of those kind of boiling the ocean type of activities where it's done because it has to be done. So that's kind of the angle that I would play, that kind of why you shouldn't use technology, market research technology in particular.
Thanks for sharing. Lastly, from me, are you able to share any positive news stories regarding the implementation of some of the research technology that you've been hinting at, and perhaps some of the outcomes that it's helped to deliver? You're welcome, obviously, to keep it anonymized as well.
Yeah. So I mean, as a product evangelist, my primary role within Ipsos is to evangelize one of our products. And it is like my goal to do that, but it's actually grounded in like proven kind of what I've seen happen with the platforms, like proven facts kind of thing. And so this is like a specific market research technology that we have access to internally that we can use for internal efficiency. Pardon me, but it also can be used by our clients and also can be used as a delivery platform. So it really has a kind of multifaceted approach. And so I've seen several different cases where it's been successful for different reasons because different stakeholders are involved. But the core real piece of why those have been successful has been focusing on what aspect of the market research technology solves a specific need for a specific user, and that specific user getting that benefit from it, right? And so that's what really excites me about my current role, is because I get to continue to see people go through this kind of change cycle. If you've heard of the transition curve, that's another one that'll build into the mix here, right? You start out, pardon me, you start out, you think you understand it, you're like at the top, you're like, yeah, I got it. Something critical happens, crash and fail, you drop down to the bottom, it's unsalvageable, you never think you'll come out of it. Then you turn that corner, you have that realization, and then you end up higher than you were before, right? That often happens as we're implementing market research technology, because you get into it, you got it, something happens, you can't do it, and then you come over it. And then after you come through that kind of transition curve, you're then able to get so much more benefit out of it. I've seen that happen with clients, I've seen that happen internally with colleagues and friends. And it's just really exciting to be able to see that kind of thing happen. And market research technology gives us a great way to enable that. So I know no specifics, but
No,
hopefully
that's
that
fine.
answers.
I mean, what is it with people's expectations with technology implementations? Because you do see that happening, like expecting perfection, when in fact it's an incredibly complex sort of process to undertake.
Yeah, the expectation setting piece is really critical. And so the expectations are always way too high, right? Again, kind of going back to that point of like everything has to be perfect type of thing, right? So again, carving out that kind of specific need and then focusing on that specific need and then reinforcing that it's just for that one need, right? To say like, the benefit you'll get from this is this thing, right? There are all of these other things that you've got to deal with, but this thing is going to be solved. And it's the problem when people think it's all of this that gets solved by the market research technology. And so a lot of that just comes down to that kind of reinforcement of the messaging, right? Like, yep, it can do that, but that's not what we're focusing on, right? Bringing it back to the small piece, right? To say, look, we're just focusing on this. And then after you've got that and you're comfortable with that, then we can explore other ways that it could be worked in. But let's start with that small piece and that focus on that expectation for that benefit and try and reel in the expectation beast, so to say.
For sure. So any final words before we close, Bryan?
Yeah. The last thing I'll share is you should start. Is you probably have been thinking about it. Even if you haven't, find a thing to start. And the most important piece is starting, and the second most important piece is keeping at it. And it can be small. It doesn't need to be a big commitment. Like 30 minutes a week makes a huge difference. I think you may have heard of the kind of Olympic athletes that change their pillows, right? And so it's a small incremental gain over time, right? They get a little bit more sleep every day, but the benefit is multiplicative, right? So in 3 months, in 6 months, in 9 months, they're performing better because they made a small change in how they did things. So take the leap and get started would be what I'd say.
Awesome. Great words to finish with. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me again.
You're
That's
welcome. Thank you also to those who've listened in today. If you have liked what you've heard, feel free to reach out to Bryan Smith on LinkedIn. Also subscribe to the podcast, or share it with others as well who also might like to hear these particular words, especially if you are undertaking some form of review of your technology as well. There's some really good nuggets in here for you to consider. Welcome also to leave a review as well so others can find the podcast too. Until next time, thanks for listening to Now That's Significant.